So, hello and welcome to our webinar, Deliver or Disappear. Sounds very serious. Elevating e-commerce delivery to beat basket abandonment. So thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Bobby Tulis. I'm Group Marketing Director with GFS, and I'm very happy to be joined today by Richard Lim. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Bobby.
Fantastic. Now, I doubt that there's anybody in the room that does not know who retail economics are, or indeed who you are, Richard. But just in case, why don't you just give us a brief intro?
Brilliant. Thanks, Bobby. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, I'm Richard Lim, CEO of Retail Economics. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're an independent economics consultancy focused specifically on consumer and retail. So we do a lot of our own research. We produce a lot of our own proprietary data. But essentially, we put economic analysis, econometric modeling, forecasting, behavioral economics, and a lot of our own proprietary data at the heart of the insight that we offer the industry.
Absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, you guys are the Bible for what's going on in the retail industry. And if you don't already read Richard's posts on LinkedIn every Sunday with a cup of coffee, then I would certainly recommend that you do. So over to GFS. Okay, so just quickly, if you don't know who we are, we were established back in 2001. At that point, we were the first provider of multi-carrier services and technology. And since then, we're now the largest provider, and we handle more than 34 million parcels a year across the UK and worldwide. And that's equally for delivery and returns. So, Richard, we're here today because we've just published, or I should say, we together, Retail Economics and GFS have just published the second annual report around cart abandonment and due to delivery related issues. So everyone, you're going to be able to download the full report in all its detail using the QR code. But the webinar today is really about us cutting to the chase and highlighting the key learnings and takeaways from that research. So it all started back in 2018, if you remember, Richard, with Barclays publishing that report that said that retailers were losing out on about 18 billion a year because of cart abandonment. So this led us to come to you, Richard, in 2023, because we wanted to understand, has this figure changed? And more importantly, what was the cost of cart abandonment due to delivery related issues? And when we did that first report last year, you calculated it at about 32 billion. So now we're on now published issue 2. And of course, the big question is, what's the number? But don't reveal it just yet.
Thanks, Bobby. So in order, though, to try to update the research or to update the research from the previous year, we surveyed 2,000 nationally representative consumers across the UK. So you can see there it's representative of age, it's representative of income groups, and also the split between gender as well. But essentially, it's a robust sample of consumers that we use to be able to to shine a spotlight on that basket abandonment issue for the industry.
Right. But specifically, this is UK consumers, yeah? Over 2,000 that we've surveyed. Fantastic. Okay, so thank you for those intros and quick bit of background. Let's get on to what we're going to be discussing. So first off, it'd be really great, Richard, if you could talk to us about the macro economy so we understand the backdrop of the report, what's changed since 2023, and who is feeling the pinch. Then please reveal to us the true cost of what poor delivery really costs the businesses, and importantly, has it changed? Rather than go into all the detail, tell us what the key trends are. You said there's 3 trends that have clearly coming through from the research driving cart abandonment. So let's understand what those are. Let's also understand what are some of the operational barriers that retailers are seeing, preventing them from being able to address this delivery gap. And then where does this lead us to in terms of what changes retailers should be considering? What are the 5 keys to getting delivery right for the customer and for the business? So start us off with telling us a bit about the macroeconomy, Richard.
Brilliant. Well, the reality is that consumers have gone through a really difficult and challenging time over the last couple of years. And actually, if you look back at the cost of living crisis, what we had was a period of time where inflation was outpacing earnings growth for 18 consecutive months. And so actually, it eroded about 50 billion pounds
Wow.
worth of spending power from UK households. So we're now on this next phase, if you like, of the cost of living crisis. So inflation has fallen quite rapidly. It's back down to 2% at target rate now. And earnings growth has overtaken inflation. So we're seeing that return to real earnings growth. So that's good news. But there's a reality here that there's the impact of a second wave of pressure on households that all revolves around interest rates.
So Richard, we've all felt the financial pinch a lot, but what's changed now?
Thanks, Bobby. So yeah, I think what's changed now really is that this second wave of the cost of living crisis, or this kind of like we think about this as a second act of the cost of living crisis, really revolves around interest rates. And so what we've seen is that the Bank of England had to respond to those high levels of inflation by rising interest rates, and the implication being that higher interest rates are feeding through to mortgages and to higher repayments on debts as well. And so I appreciate this is a pretty busy graph, but let me simplify it. And so across the top of it, you've got a bar there that shows that there's 28 million households in the UK. There's about a third of them that are mortgage free. There's about 30% of them that do have a mortgage, 20% private rental, and 17% in social housing. If there's one thing that I would want people to take as a key message from this slide, is that there's a particular group of households that we feel are under the most amount of pressure. It's what we've termed the aspirational millennial group. So this is a group that's typically under the age of 45. They might be higher earning households. They've bought their first house in the last kind of 10 to 12 years. They're only used to kind of like ultra low interest rates. They might have a car on PCP. They might have two cars on PCP. But it's kind of this particular group that's been exposed disproportionately in terms of the impact of rising interest rates and the implication that has on discretionary spending after they've paid for their essential costs. For retailers, this group is really important as well, because this is a group that spends disproportionately within the sector. They're also generally have a higher proportion of their income is spent online as well. So they're typically higher frequency in terms of online spending, higher transaction values for online spending as well. So it's a really, really important group for consumers to focus on, for retailers to focus on.
That's a really important point, and something we need to remember as we're going through the research is that it's these core spenders, the under 45s, that are so important to online spend, because they are the ones that are buying more frequently online and typically with higher transaction values. And these are the ones that are feeling the pinch. So let's remember that as we're going through the research, because a lot of things fall into place because of that. But before we get into the research, Richard, just let's talk about the cost. Okay, so first off, tell us how you arrived at the cost, how that was calculated.
Sure. So at a very high level and very kind of like a simple level, of course, what we do is we look at average transaction values, and then we look at the proportion of those online potential sales that are abandoned at that point of checkout. Very simplistic, but then there's a much more detail that then kind of supports this overall model. So in reality, what we also do to support this number is a bottom-up model. So we look at individual groups of consumers by age. We also look at their spending, online spending habits by individual categories as well. And so we have our own proprietary data that looks at these things around average transaction values for online sales, for particular age groups, for particular categories. And then we've also got basket abandonment rates for all of those different areas of spending. And so from a bottom-up approach, we then calculate the total cost of basket abandonment across the industry.
Based on delivery related issues, correct? So this is, like you said, this is purely looking at calculating the cost of cart abandonment where those panelists have said they've abandoned their purchase because of delivery issues or delivery related factors. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so now let's get on to the actual number.
So when we did this last year, what we saw is that basket abandonment cost the industry around £31.5 billion. And then this year we saw that rise to about £34.2 billion. So it's a significant increase. It's an increase of about 9% compared to the previous year. And just to make this really clear for everyone, we're not talking about necessarily lost sales, but what we are talking about is a displacement in sales from one retailer potentially to another. So they get to that point of checkout, and because their expectations aren't met around delivery, that might be around cost or speed or delivery options. Their expectations aren't met, and so they leave it at the checkout and essentially go to a retailer that can meet their expectations.
Well, that's great, but as a retailer, although we're saying that the money is actually just being displaced to somewhere else because they're taking their custom elsewhere, as a retailer, it's still a loss to me and a gain for my competitor, correct? So now, Richard, the numbers on the surface, it doesn't seem like a huge change from 31.5 to 34.2 billion. So as a retailer, I'm not sure I should be really that worried about it, but should I?
Yeah,
is there,
well,
yeah.
I mean, I would argue that a 9% increase compared to last year is a significant increase. And actually, I would say it is also a kind of like a worrying trend as well.
Right.
Some of this might be around the cost of living crisis in terms of people are much more conscious about their own personal budget. So when it comes to having to pay for delivery options or having to pay for returns, or also just the fact that there's just pressures within that budget, they might be making much more considered decisions as well. I think some of that will feed into it. But I think the one thing that I was surprised about in this research is that when we looked at last year's results and then looked at this year's results, the key group that was actually driving that increase was, going back to what we mentioned before, was that an under 45 more affluent group of consumers. So again, this is, that basket abandonment rate that had increased compared to last year is being driven across a group of consumers that shop online more frequently, have higher transaction values. It's that group that's a really important group of consumers that have seen that uplift in abandonment rates.
And clearly, if they're your highest free, the customers that shop the most with you and spend potentially the most with you, if you're losing their sales, then that's going to hurt the most too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which we can't afford to do. But for me, what you mentioned is, yes, okay, I didn't want to be, flippant about it. A 9% increase, every penny is worth trying to prevent losing. Yeah. But for me, what you said around this being a worrying trend is important, because if we strip away the backdrop, what remains consistent that we're seeing year on year is this missed opportunity where retailers are overlooking the requirements, the delivery expectations, not meeting those expectations, which means that regardless of what's going on in the background, there will still be this propensity for shoppers to take their custom elsewhere if those delivery expectations are not being met. And that's the crucial point for me that needs to be addressed. So to understand in this context, let's focus on those under 45s core spenders. To understand what their expectations are around delivery is going to be important for retailers in order to bring down that, to prevent those lost sales and to bring down that figure. So this leads us on to, let's talk about the top 3 trends
Yeah.
from the research.
The first trend that we saw, and this was really clear, is that there's particular age groups that are most likely to abandon baskets, and those being younger age groups, the under 45s. And so across across the top 6 categories that we looked at, age was a really significant driver of abandonment rates. And you can see there, this is ranked by order going from left to right, but the typical Gen Z group, when it comes to clothing and footwear, on average, are abandoning about 40% of their potential purchases. There's a clear correlation where it drops by age down to 10.6% for the over 65s when it comes to clothing. But across every single category, we saw that the youngest consumers are the ones that are most likely to abandon their baskets, and that drop off significantly as consumers got older.
What else do we see around that, Richard?
We also saw that the expectations when it came to free deliveries is also really interesting as well. And what this graph shows is the average time that consumers are willing to wait for free deliveries for a kind of a typical 25 to 50 pound online order. And what you see there when it looks at frequency of online purchases is consumers that typically, for example, shop more than once a week online, or about once a week online, about once a fortnight, and so on. Those consumers that shop more frequently online have much higher expectations when it comes to free delivery as well. So consumers that shop typically online more than once a week expect free delivery to be there within 2.7 days, compared to those that shop around once a year or even once every 6 months, where actually they're prepared to wait much longer, over 4 days when it comes to free delivery.
So it feels so far that what we see is that this group of under 45s are the most important, but potentially, but also the ones with the most demanding customers to satisfy when it comes to how long they're willing to wait for delivery, even if it's free.
Yeah,
And they're also the ones that are going to be the highest propensity to abandon their purchase if their needs aren't being met. But what are they looking for in terms of choice of delivery? What is it that matters to them?
sure. And so when you look at this almost binary option around choice versus costs, if you look at this graph and go to the far right, then actually on average, there's about 50-50 split on average. 50% of consumers that are prioritizing choice and about 50% that are prioritizing cost. But actually, what that high level masks is the difference by age and income as well. So when you start splitting that down by age and income, so the very left box looks at younger consumers split by different affluence groups, and then middle-aged consumers and older consumers again split by groups of affluence. You see this clear correlation where it's the older consumers, and typically the ones that are aged under 45, that prioritize choice over cost when it comes to delivery options.
Okay, so we've seen that speed of delivery is important for them. Cost is not an issue when, delivery choice trumps cost. But what about the actual options or choices that are important to them? What do we see there, Richard?
So when it comes to the choices for delivery, they remained remarkably similar to the previous year, actually. And so what you've got here is we've put a box around there, but whether it's next day delivery, nominated delivery, express delivery, or standard home delivery, these are the 4 most important delivery options that consumers are looking for. And actually, they were the same in order compared to the research that we did last year. When it comes to returns, we saw a bit of a mix-up actually. And so last year, we saw that returns via post, for example, was number one. That's now slipped down to number two. It's been replaced by home collection. And that might be, of course, a premium returns option. But when it comes to returns, the most important is around convenience, that seamless returns process, but home collection being number one, return via post, and then dropping off a parcel drop off were the three most popular returns options as well, what consumers are looking for.
What about, I can see number 10 on in terms of delivery, outbound delivery, we've got sustainable delivery seems to have slipped from 8 to 10.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would have thought that would have moved up the ranks. What does that tell you?
I think it reaffirms what we've been speaking a lot about already, which is a bit around the cost of living crisis, and that focus on budgets. But essentially, when you ask consumers what are the most important things when it comes to delivery, it's about choice, it's about speed, and it's about cost. And actually, that group of consumers that might prioritize eco delivery options and has sustainability as one of their core fundamentals in their kind of values around who they might shop with and the delivery options that they choose. In reality, it's kind of around the fringes of what we see in that wider kind of like final mile delivery space.
Yeah. Just to add to your point earlier, when you said the three things that are important to consumers is choice, speed, and cost, correct? For us, choice comes with, it's also about convenience. And for us, choice and convenience are the same thing, because the more choice you give to customers, that means they've got a better chance of picking the option that is most convenient for them and their busy lifestyle. So I just wanted to add that in, is that choice and convenience can almost be seen as one, and that is a very, very important driving factor. And then, of course, you've got speed and you've got cost.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And and the reality is that these aren't options that consumers think about in isolation or relevant across all purchases. These are kind of a blend of different options that they want depending on things like the shopper mission. So if it's a gifting purchase, for example, then reliability is really key. If it's a distressed purchase, then it might all be about speed. So actually offering those that kind of variety of delivery options helps consumers depending on the type of product, the price point, the shopper mission. So it's about having that blend of options that cater for all kinds of eventualities.
But Richard, are they willing to pay for it, especially in the current economic climate? What did we discover around willingness to pay?
Sure. And I think this is I think this is a really interesting trend, a final trend in the deck, but it almost kind of like dispels this myth of consumers just want free and just want fast and they're not willing to pay for it. Because actually what we found is that there's about 80% of consumers that are willing to consider paying for premium delivery options in some instances. So overall about 80%, and then when you break that down, there's about a third of consumers that will consider premium options, but only in certain circumstances, and almost half of consumers that will consider premium delivery options almost in any circumstance. And actually, that's a rise on this time last year as well. So it just goes to show that depending on the shopper mission, depending on price points and different characteristics of what they're purchasing, almost half of consumers are willing to consider premium delivery options almost all of the time.
That is a fascinating data point. Now, if I'm a retailer listening to that, especially given at a time when there is so much pressure on taking costs out of the business and improve, protecting profit margin, that tells me that my customers potentially, where I'm offering services at a reduced cost, where I'm potentially covering some, carrying some of the cost of those premium delivery services that I'm offering to customers, or where I'm even offering them for free, that could be an opportunity for me to try and, increase my profit and monetize delivery.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's one of the things that we've seen, of course, in the industry over the last couple of years. It's been a cost of living crisis for consumers, but it's almost been an operating cost crisis for
Yeah.
retailers. They've had these successive waves of pressure on margins, whether that's through supply chains or operating costs, through the national living wage and wages going up. So actually looking at these opportunities, looking at these areas where there can be kind of incremental revenue growth through premium delivery services, providing they are meeting and exceeding their customers' expectations, it should be a core area of focus for them.
Mm. And certainly we've seen in the fashion industry, we've seen some of the leading brands like Next, Zara, I think H&M as well, making that bold move and introducing costs for returns, increased costs for delivery, and also charging for returns. So absolutely. But when we drill down into it,
Mhm.
where do we see variances?
Sure. Again, it's kind of like really just to reaffirm this point that when you look at this across the spectrum of under 45s, which you kind of call the digital natives, if you like, these are generally consumers that have been born into that digital age. Shopping online is just kind of second nature to them versus the over 45s. And then we split that by income group as well. What the green shows is essentially a higher willingness to pay, the red showing not so high in terms of willingness to pay. But again, that under 45s, most affluent group has the highest willingness to pay for returns, highest willingness to pay for delivery. They typically shop online more frequently, but they also have higher expectations when it comes to free delivery and how quickly they should be receiving their deliveries. So if you, just a couple of data points there, you can see that under 45s, most affluent are prepared to pay £2.60 for a returns option. And if you can contrast that to the over 45s least affluent group, they're only prepared to pay 90 pence on average. So actually, there's quite a big difference in terms of willingness to pay between these different groups of consumers.
It's almost a no-brainer, isn't it? When you think that your customers who are shopping most frequently with you and spending probably the most with you are also the ones that are willing to pay for premium services so that they've got that choice and convenience. Um, why would we still be why are we still, offering free even? It's a missed opportunity, isn't it? Or at least to be far more discerning about where you offer
Mm.
free or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And just understanding your customers as well,
Yeah,
understanding who your customers are and having a sense of the profitable ones and whether they are actually willing to pay is really crucial.
absolutely.
And Bobby, do you find that some of those reflect what you see as a business, what GFS sees as a business across your clients?
Absolutely. I mean, we work with, you know, so many brands across all industries, but one thing that I would say is consistent is that when we're going and we're talking to ops teams and to e-commerce teams, it's not that they don't understand that how vital it is to be able to offer that delivery choice and convenience and those breadth of options to their customers. But what's holding them back is this notion that if they were to add more services, that would mean having to work with more carriers and introducing more cost and complexity, operational cost and complexity in their business. And that's really the stumbling block for them. Like I said, this notion that more services means that you're just scaling the complexity and cost in your business. So that really brings us now to what are the key conclusions from the report? And from my perspective, I would say that the obvious ones are that retailers really do need to address this delivery gap, not only because of the current economic climate, and everybody's focused on protecting profit and bottom line, but also because if they don't, this is a worrying trend that's going to keep increasing. So delivery related abandonment is a hidden loss because, like I've mentioned before, when we talk to retailers, if we ask them the specific question, do you know how many customers abandon their purchase when they get to the delivery page and see what options are being asked? Many of them don't know what that is. So for them, it's a cost which is hidden to them. But this research really does surface that. And when you say that 1 in 4 carts are abandoned at the checkout because consumers aren't happy with the delivery options they're being offered, then that makes it a reality to any retailer. So it's a hidden loss that's on the rise, but it can't be ignored, especially as spending on retail is under such pressure. What is really worrying for me is that it's coming from the increase in abandonment rates from 2023 to the current doesn't seem to have shifted much. But what's really worrying for me is that it's shifted to those core under 45s spenders, which means that there's greater risk and urgency for retailers to resolve the delivery gap. The next point, and like you said yourself, is that the research again smashes some of the commonly held myths in the industry that it's all about free and fast. But actually, what we've proven in both last year's report and this year's report is that what consumers value more is, especially for those core spenders, is that delivery choice and convenience is what they value above free, above cost in some cases. Obviously, when we're looking at the segment of those core spenders, and they're willing to pay for it. However, while retailers understand this, and it's not something they don't know, what's holding them back is that they have this notion that in order to increase their delivery options, they're being constrained by the additional complexity and cost that this is going to introduce into the operations, which is what makes them hesitant to take that step. Mm-hmm. So, Richard, for me, those are the key conclusions. I don't know whether you would agree with them or not. If there's anything else you want to add to that.
No, I think those are really succinctly put. Of course, the report itself goes into lots more detail. So
exactly, read the report is what we're trying to say. But now let's get to the give, which is okay. So where does this take us? Where does this lead retailers in terms of what they need to be, how they can build a strategy for delivery that's going to help them tackle this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's for us, when we looked at the data, we did the analysis, we drew out those insights into better understanding what's shaping the industry, the direction of consumers. We came up with 5 core strategies that we wanted to outline in the report. The first one, and we touched on this a fair bit already, but it is around choice. And so depending on the shopper mission, the price point, the different category, the type of consumer, their expectations, they want choice. And what our research showed is that overall, there's about 5 delivery options on average that they want. So that kind of 5 delivery options will cater for most eventualities when it comes for shopping across those different areas, but actually just being able to offer 5 different delivery options we see as kind of a crucial strategy.
And it's also about the mix, isn't it, Richard? Is offer 5. You need to have 5 to sort of cover the bases, but it's important that you've got the mix right, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And so within the report as well, and on the previous slide, we were looking at those different delivery options that people want, whether that's same day, next day, delivery time slots. But yes, it is about choice and making sure that you've got the right choice that's relevant to your core customer group.
Absolutely. And don't leave money on the table. If they're willing to pay for it, why not look at how you can offset some of your operational costs by passing some of the cost to customers if they're willing to pay for it?
Yes, yeah. The second point is around a simplification of working with the right partners to move from, having multiple carriers essentially, which was, how retailers had to develop their delivery model at the beginning, but moving from that to a single multi-carrier partnership to try to simplify things, because the reality is that the customer journey has become infinitely more complex, and consumers are kind of bouncing around between these different channels. They might start their journey online, they might finish it, or then they go into store to check and feel out and understand more about the products, and then go online and order it on their mobile phones on the way home. And so that having that kind of more complex customer journey with different options depending on, as I was saying, shopper mission, but where consumers are, that simplification from a business operating perspective, again, being really key in this much more complex retail environment.
And certainly addresses, some of the barriers that we've mentioned in retailers understanding that they want to and need to increase delivery options, but what they see as the barriers to that, that idea, that notion that and I guess this way really gives them an option to have all the benefits of working in multi-carrier services, but without some of the downsides, I guess.
Yeah. The third one is all about reliability. It might seem like a bit of an obvious one, but the reality is that consumers' expectations are higher than ever before. They've become intolerant of bad experiences. And so when it comes to reliability, retailers can't afford to not deliver against the expectations that consumers set. And that bar keeps on being raised higher and higher, because there's so many different options out there.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because there's research that shows that reliability and it is non-negotiable, and how as consumers a failed delivery in the consumer's eyes is not a parcel that fails to turn up, but it's a parcel that fails to turn up when you promised it was going to turn up. So and I guess also it also highlights how important it is to have delivery contingency built into your strategy, so that if the service fails on one side or looks as though it's not performing to where it needs to be, you can move it somewhere else so that you can protect those service levels and protect that promise to your customer too.
Yeah, absolutely. The fourth one is just around technology, and so we know that that the most successful retailers, the most profitable retailers, those retailers that have managed to grow their online businesses over the last decade, are those that have invested in technology. They've invested in technology. They are forming the right partnerships as well, and choosing those partnerships very carefully, but essentially remaining ahead of the curve and continuing to invest resource, time, and effort into that continuation of digital transformation, and putting final mile delivery as a really important part of that. Again, is going to be a critical strategy going forwards.
And certainly the point you make about technology, Richard, in terms of enhancing that customer experience, the front end customer experience, actually also technology is key to simplifying the back end as well, in terms of the processes around multi-carrier fulfillment, shipping and dispatch. So that's an important thing that really goes hand in hand with having a multi-carrier partner, is ensuring you've got the technology platform to simplify the operations as well.
Yeah. And then finally, it's about treating outbound and inbound with kind of like equal weighting, but we know
Yeah.
that returns, it's a significant friction point within the customer journey. And so we know that if a retailer isn't offering that kind of seamless returns process for consumers, then actually that's a barrier for consumers. They might not want to shop with a retailer that doesn't offer that convenient returns experience for them. And so if you look at some categories, we know that some categories we see returns rates in the 30 to 40%. So if we know that if consumers, and often consumers will go into the purchase journey knowing that they might have to return products because they've bought 3 pairs of jeans with the intention of returning 2 of them. So actually that returns process and making it as convenient for consumers as possible can build better loyalty, can enhance the lifetime value of consumers. But it's become a critical part of the overall journey for consumers.
Yeah, and I think your point around treat returns in equal measure as delivery is a really important one, because the same principles apply in terms of what consumers are looking for around choice of options and convenience. And certainly that's how we that's how we sort of try to give that equal focus when we're looking at delivery and applying the same principles around delivery. We're also looking at applying the same principles around returns. And you're absolutely right, Richard. It's another source of cart abandonment. Again, if the returns options aren't there, it's another reason why shoppers will abandon their carts at the last minute.
Yeah.
So I couldn't have said it better myself. I think those 5 points represent a really robust framework for a winning strategy that covers everything from the breadth of options, simplification, reliability, technology, how that helps, and of course, not overlooking the importance of returns. So that brings us nicely to the end of our webinar. So hopefully everyone has taken away the key points, but don't forget, you can download the full report with a lot more detail around what Richard and his team have uncovered through the research. So just scan this QR code here and you'll be able to download the full report, which is our second one, 2024. And I look forward to our third issue of the report next year, Richard. So thank you so much for joining us today, and always for all your expertise and insights. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Cheers.